right. Hello, everyone. We are here today, and today we are going to be working on lesson 10. Lesson 10 entitled Ezekiel's Inaugural Vision and Call. Okay. So now once again, we're still part of Unit 2. In Unit 2, we are focusing on Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And so previously we have been studying Jeremiah, but now our focus is on Ezekiel. Okay. And so here with lesson 10, Ezekiel's inaugural vision and call. And the central truth, Jesus Christ calls all of his disciples to endure difficulties as they follow him. So this was not an easy task for Ezekiel. And we're going to see, that it was not an easy task. All right. And so it says here in the passage that today's study explores the beginnings of the prophetic ministry of Ezekiel, another Old Testament prophet who was called to endure difficult times and experiences because of his calling. Ezekiel, like Jeremiah, can give us an intimate glimpse into the motivations and self-understanding of these special prophets of God. They served as examples to provide us with assurance that God will help us to do whatever he calls us to do. Okay. No matter how difficult the task may seem, that God will provide us with help. Okay. He will provide us with help. He's not going to abandon us. And so here, let's look at, from the Bible, let's look at Ezekiel is giving us some insight and giving us, an example of what was going on and looking at some of his experiences. And then we can kind of tie it into our life today, because there is some correlation or some relation, or some parallels that we can connect with Ezekiel and what he was experiencing at this time. And so the scripture here, it says from Ezekiel, the second chapter, the second verse, it says, the Spirit entered into me when he spake unto me and set me upon my feet, that I heard him that spake unto me. The Spirit came into me as he spoke, and he set me on my feet. I listened carefully to his words. All right. And that's from the New Living Testament right there. Okay. So now let's look at what was going on here. Let's try to put our personal spin on it where it relates to us, where, it makes sense. So my question for you all here, it says, what is, and let me move this up just a little. Okay. What's the most difficult thing a supervisor or someone else in authority over you has asked you to do? What training did they provide to help you succeed in that task? So what was something very difficult that they asked you to do, and you're like, I can't do that. I don't know anything about that. I don't know why you even asking me to do this. So let's think of a time when they asked you to do a specific task. Because it's all kind of jobs, all kind of careers that we're all are involved in, that a time or two your supervisor or the person that is in authority over you, maybe your lead, the lead person on your team, asked you to do something that you were a little afraid of, you were frightened to do, you lacked the training in order, to do it. All right. And so what training did they provide to you to help you succeed that task? Okay. And so here, this is relating to Ezekiel because God gave him a task that he had no training in. He didn't know what to do. And he was afraid. He was frightened in order to do it. Okay. So I just want y'all to start thinking about that, tying it into your personal life of a task or a time that you had to do something that you were afraid to do. But then at the same time, the person did provide training, they did provide help in order for you to accomplish the task. All right. And so Ezekiel is unique among the Old Testament prophets. No other prophet had visions as detailed and intriguing, and few prophets embodied their message in a more personal and sacrificial way than he does. Okay. And so earlier we studied the call of the prophet Jeremiah and saw how God signaled out this young man for a powerful yet difficult ministry as a crucial moment in the history of God's people. In today's lesson, we will study the calling of Ezekiel, who was a contemporary of Jeremiah. Their ministries were similar, but based in different locations. While Jeremiah was still preaching in Jerusalem, Ezekiel was ministering to God's people in exile. Like Jeremiah, he was confronted with difficulty and opposition, but was sustained by God's strength and by his passion for the call of God on his life. All right, so God did provide him with the training that he needed. All right, so let's look at the beginning of the story here. So first, let's look at Ezekiel. Let's look at the book of Ezekiel. And first, we're going to concentrate on chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. An exiled priest, a vision of God. So let's look at this. In my 13th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day, while I was among the exiles by the Kibar River, the heavens were open and I saw visions of God. On the 5th of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin, the word of the Lord came to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buza, by the Kibar River in the land of the Babylonians. There the hand of the Lord was on him. I looked and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, and a mist cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures. All right, and I'm going to stop right there because it says verses 1 through 4. So let's look at the beginning phases when he first saw this vision. Okay, so let's look at the very beginning of it. So like Jeremiah, Ezekiel came from a priestly family. However, unlike Jeremiah, Ezekiel's family was still serving in the temple at the time of the Babylonian exile. Jeremiah's mission began as a precursor to the exile, while Ezekiel's message began after the exile commenced. Okay, so Ezekiel is coming in after the fact. So first, yes, Jeremiah was present. All right. But now we're looking at after the fact. Let's look at the rest of the story after Jeremiah. Now here comes Ezekiel during the exile, okay, with the Babylonians. So in 1597 BC, Nebuchadnezzar sent Judea's king Jehoiachin into exile in Babylon along with 10,000 Jews from the upper classes of Jerusalem society. As was the usual practice, only the poor were left in the land. Among the exiles was a Zodikite priest named Ezekiel. The Babylonians settled this young priest in a village called Tel Ib on the Kibar Canal, about 200 miles north of the capital city. When Ezekiel was 30 years old, God added the office of prophet to his priestly calling. As the priest in the land of the Chaldeans, Ezekiel will be one to whom Jews in exile looked for guidance. And as a godly priest and prophet, he will be interested in their spiritual welfare. One day, Ezekiel saw a vision of God approaching in the distance. God appeared in a form that was associated with his saving, delivering presence, an assurance that was much needed by the Judean exiles. It was an awe-inspiring sight. The Lord's presence was preceded by a great storm cloud that flashed with lightning. This was what is called a storm thephany. Such a thephany is a familiar image in the Old Testament. When God approaches in the storm cloud, his powerful presence routs the enemies and delivers his people. The sight of this cloud must have filled Ezekiel's heart with hope and joy. God's people were captive in exile, but God was in control and mighty to deliver. Okay, so here is Ezekiel in the midst of all this chaos, in exile, and here God chose him. God chose him in the midst of all of this to be the prophet, to be the one to lead the people, to guide them, for inspiration, for guidance. And Ezekiel was like, what? Like, God, do you not see what is going on around me? And you chose me through all this chaos that is going on? But yep, God chose him. All right, God chose him. So here's a question here. It says, how might a storm symbolize God's power? A storm, okay? And so we've all been witnesses to storms and have seen it. We've been home when a storm was going on. Maybe we've been driving down the highway when a storm is going on, or we're watching the weather and we see different storms. But how might a storm symbolize God's power? So some things that I jot down that I was thinking about this. One thing, storms are unpredictable sometimes. They can be violent, ferocious. They can be scary. Sometimes you see flashing lights or bright lights, strong winds. You know, it just depends on, you know, the type of storm. So we got hurricanes, we got tornadoes, you know, just regular thunderstorms that, you know, come through. So how might a storm symbolize God's power, God's mighty power? Okay, because this goes back to what Ezekiel saw. He saw a storm cloud. He saw a windstorm with flashing lightning. Okay, this is what he saw in his vision. Okay, and so here he's staring at it, looking at it, trying to figure out, well, what is this? You know, what is going on? So I know for a moment, and when you think about probably at the time, you know, think about how would you feel if you saw something like this approaching you? It's scary. Okay, it was a scary and frightful situation that Ezekiel was in. Okay, but God used a storm cloud to get his attention. All right, he used the storm cloud here. All right, and so now let's look at the rest of the story after he saw the storm cloud. Let's see what happens afterwards. All right, inaugural vision. So we looked at an exiled priest, a vision of God, in Ezekiel, the first chapter, 1 through 4. And now the next part of it, it says 4 cherubim and the throne of God. So next we're going to look at Ezekiel, the first chapter again, but now we need to look at the 5th verse through the 28th verse. Okay. And so what I'm going to do at this time, since this is very lengthy, I'm going to actually play it so that y'all can hear what was said. So we're going to go through the 5th through the 28th verse.
Ezekiel, chapter 1. In my 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day, while I was among the exiles by the Kabar River, the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. On the 5th of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin. The word of the Lord came to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, by the Kabar River in the land of the Babylonians. There the hand of the Lord was on him. I looked, and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures. In appearance, their form was human, but each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, their feet were like those of a calf and gleamed like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands. All 4 of them had faces and wings, and the wings of one touched the wings of another. Each one went straight ahead. They did not turn as they moved. Their faces looked like this. Each of the 4 had the face of a human being, and on the right side, each had the face of a lion, and on the left, the face of an ox. Each also had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. They each had 2 wings spreading out upward, each wing touching that of the creature on either side, and each had two other wings covering its body. Each one went straight ahead. Wherever the spirit would go, they would go without turning as they went. The appearance of the living creatures was like burning coals of fire or like torches. Fire moved back and forth among the creatures. It was bright, and lightning flashed out of it. The creatures sped back and forth like flashes of lightning. As I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the ground beside each creature with its four faces. This was the appearance and structure of the wheels. They sparkled like topaz, and all four looked alike. Each appeared to be made like a wheel intersecting a wheel. As they moved, they would go in any one of the four directions the creatures faced. The wheels did not change direction as the creatures went. Their rims were high and awesome, and all four rims were full of eyes all around. When the living creatures moved, the wheels beside them moved. And when the living creatures rose from the ground, the wheels also rose. Wherever the spirit would go, they would go, and the wheels would rise along with them, because the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. When the creatures moved, they also moved. When the creatures stood still, they also stood still. And when the creatures rose from the ground, the wheels rose along with them, because the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Spread out above the heads of the living creatures was what looked something like a vault, sparkling like crystal and awesome. Under the vault, their wings were stretched out one toward the other, and each had two wings covering its body. When the creatures moved, I heard the sound of their wings, like the roar of rushing waters, like the voice of the Almighty, like the tumult of an army. When they stood still, they lowered their wings. Then there came a voice from above the vault over their heads as they stood with lowered wings. Above the vault, over their heads, was what looked like a throne of lapis lazuli, and high above on the throne was a figure like that of a man. I saw that from what appeared to be his waist up, he looked like glowing metal, as if full of fire, and that from there down he looked like fire, and brilliant light surrounded him, like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day. So was the radiance around him. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. When I saw it, I fell face down, and I heard the voice of one speaking. Ezekiel 2. He said to me, Son of man, stand up on your feet, and I will speak to you.
So here, I'm going to pause it right there for right now, but this right here was a very powerful vision that Ezekiel saw. And we can see how Ezekiel describes the vision, okay? He really described the vision. And so you can see that this really got his attention, okay? It really did got his attention. And so he started looking and paying attention now. So Ezekiel's vision is the clearest physical description of cherubim in the Bible. They bear aloft the throne of God, transforming it into a war chariot. Okay, so it was transformed into a war chariot. So that might help you out with visualizing, well, what was this that he saw, you know, and you're trying to put all the pieces of what he was saying and what he was describing in your mind. You're trying to visualize all of this, okay? But it says too that it was transforming into a war chariot. So that might help somebody with understanding exactly, well, how did this look? All right. And so here, looking at the passage, it says, within the cloud, Ezekiel saw four fantastic creatures with both human and animal features. The basic form of each creature was human, but each one had four faces, that of a man, a lion, an eagle, and an ox. In addition, each creature had hooves like a calf, human hands and 4 wings, 2 of which were raised high, touching the wings of his neighbor. Later, Ezekiel revealed that these creatures were cherubim. The seraphim, which appeared in Isaiah's call narrative, are similar in some ways, but the seraphim that Isaiah talked about had 6 wings, whereas Ezekiel's cherubim had 4, but are described in less detail. One thing is clear: the pagan conception of a cherubim as a cute, chubby baby with wings is far from accurate. So that image, and I know we've seen little whatnots we might see in the store of the little angels, and we think they're so cute and they're called cherubims, but they're saying no, that is not an accurate account of what they actually look like. Okay, cherubims are often associated with the throne of God, as they are in the passage. Perhaps the most familiar instance of this is the Ark of the Covenant, which was flanked by cherubim on both ends with their wings extended and touching above the atonement cover. The ark represents the throne of God, which the wings of the cherubim supported aloft. Several times in the Old Testament, God is said to be enthroned between the cherubim, no doubt alluding to the Ark of the Covenant. Many scholars believe that the purpose of cherubim was to guard God's throne and other sacred places, as for instance, the entrance to the Garden of Eden. So the purpose of the cherubim was to guard God's throne and any other sacred places. So it was there to guard the throne. The true focus of Ezekiel's vision was not the cherubim, but the throne of God and the one who sat upon it. From this throne radiated the glory of God, which is one of the central themes of the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel went on to describe God's throne, which the cherubim supported from below. The throne had 4 wheels, each of which was intersected by another wheel, probably at right angles. This intersecting wheels enabled the cherubim to move the throne forward or sideways, like flashes of lightning in any direction without turning. The throne sat on a surface made of crystal resembling the sky. It appeared to be made of a deep blue, precious gemstone known as lapis lazuli, which was often used by ancient sovereigns for decorative purposes. God himself was seated on the throne. He was human in appearance and looked like glowing amber from the torso upward and like a flaming fire from the loins downward. The divine glory surrounded the throne, having the appearance of a rainbow. The fact that God's throne could appear in a distant land indicated that God's sovereignty extended to all the earth and was not confined to the temple. Thus, God showed Ezekiel that he was just as present with exiled people as he was with those still in Jerusalem. And he was appointing Ezekiel as his messenger to summon them to faithfulness. While Jeremiah was preaching in Jerusalem, keeping God's people accountable to the covenant, Ezekiel will be preaching the same messages in Babylonian. God would always speak and will entrust his message to faithful servants. So here, God was doing the work. He had Jeremiah over here doing one task, and then he had Ezekiel over here doing the same task. All right, so it was like he was dividing up the workload. He had his people here, his messengers here, and he instructed them and guided them and told them what they needed to do. Okay, because the people here are now in a distressed state. They are terrified, they are worried, they're just going out of their minds now because they have been conquered. Their country has been taken over by King Nebuchadnezzar, and they know how ruthless King Nebuchadnezzar is. And so they're worried constantly, and they don't know what to do. But here in the midst of all this chaos, God sent Jeremiah to help the people, and then God now has sent Ezekiel now in the midst of all this chaos to help and guide the people. All right, and so I have a question here for you all about Ezekiel's vision here. So the question is, what is the symbolic significance of a throne? Why would the throne have been significant to Ezekiel and the Judean exiles? So let's look at it first. Let's talk about the throne, okay? the throne. Let's look at the word, the throne itself. Like, what does that mean? Throne. How does that look? What does that symbolizes whenever we see a throne? And usually whenever we see a throne, it is related to person of authority, a leader, the person that is in charge. They're usually sitting on the throne, okay, because they are the authority figure. They are the leader, the person that is in charge here. So the other part of the question, it says, why would the throne have been significant to Ezekiel? Let's talk about that. Why would it have been important to Ezekiel and the Judean exiles? And it would have been significant to them is because they got to remember that God is in control. Nebuchadnezzar is not God, okay? God is the high being. God is the supreme ruler. He sits high on the throne. Man doesn't. And so here he wanted to remind the people that through the midst of all this chaos that is going on, trust in him, look to him, seek him for guidance, because God is in control. Okay, God's sitting up high on the throne, looking down, and he is well aware of all the chaos that's going on. So in Ezekiel's vision, there was a throne, and the purpose of that throne was a symbolic, like it says, a symbolic image there, the imagery of it. You know, looking at the literature, looking at how he described, you know, the presence of God. He's on a throne and he got his guards there guarding him, because this is secret territory. This is holy. This is divine territory. Okay. So God being on that throne is a reminder to them that he sits on high. Like, no matter what is going on, and we can relate this into our personal lives. We're looking at the news and looking at all these incidents that are going on. It seems like we are just falling apart, but just remember that God sits on high and he is up there. He's watching and he knows everything, and he has all power in his hands. All power, all power. And so here, that symbolic throne there, that vision that Ezekiel saw and how he described it, is reminding us to, and to him and to the Judean exiles, that God is in control. Okay, God is in control. All right, and so that is concluding part one, inaugural vision. All right, inaugural vision. So talking about Ezekiel when he first encountered his vision with God, and then Ezekiel went into and describing this vision and describing the presence of God that he saw in his vision. All right, so stay tuned now for part two, call to prophetic ministry. And so let's look at the rest of the story about what happened with Ezekiel. All right, so that will be part two.